Welcome back to TaraChessAcademy. Today we have another puzzle training session, but this time I won't tell you what tactics are under. You have to be on the lookout for them, just like in real games. Are you ready? Let's get started. Okay, so this is our first puzzle, white to play and find the best plan. One thing that I learned is loose pieces drop off. Look at black's pieces and see which ones have no defenders. So I can see 3 pieces, and another thing that I learned is when pieces are undefended, often double attacks can happen to those pieces. So look at these 3 pieces and see which one of them you can make a double attack with. So you can look at the bishop on c6. What you can do is you can move the queen to f5, and this makes a double attack because it attacks the king and also the bishop. And double attacks, they're stronger if you include a check, because they have to get out of check and they often can't counterattack. So that's why they don't have time to save the bishop, because when your king is in check, you have to get your king out of check. Those are the basic rules. So they have to get their king out of check. And notice they can't go to g7 because and try to defend the bishop because our rook is controlling that spot. That's why they can't go to g7. So they have to go to h8, and then you capture the bishop with check. This is our next puzzle, which is an endgame position. Black to play and find the best plan. So when you're solving this, think about what are the typical ideas in the endgame. One of the typical ideas is pawn promotion. If you don't know about that, is when the pawn, it starts from its home square and it goes all the way to the other side of the board. It can make a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. So it can turn into a different piece. And that's one of the typical ideas in the endgame. But if you can see right now, if we want to try and get a pawn promotion, what happens if you try to go a4? What will white do? So that's important in calculating, not just thinking about what you'll do, but you also have to try to find the best moves for your opponent too, not just your side. And that if you just think about your side, it won't be calculating correctly. If you play a4, the knight on c5, it will capture your pawn. And it could lead to draw in position, but it's not really clear. So that's why we can't go a4, because the knight would capture the pawn. But you can see that the knight is guarding the square a4. So what should you do about that? One thing you can do about that is just remove it. If you remove it, then you can advance your pawn. So the bishop can capture the knight. And after the king captures, once you remove the knight was the thing that was controlling the square a4. But once you remove it, now you can go a4. And it looks like it's a pawn race. Black is trying to promote, and also white will try to do the same thing. So white moves the king away because I said they want to promote too, but they couldn't do that before since their king was blocking. So they had to get the king out of the way. And now another thing, when both sides are trying to promote, that's called a pawn race. And when that happens, you want to think how many squares before the pawn becomes queen. So first, let's count for black. For black, it's 3 squares before they promote. And for white, it's 4 squares. That means that black has a shorter number of squares, so they'll promote first. That means that black will win the race. So black pushes, white, black, white, and then black gets a queen. This is our next position, black to play and find the best plan. So this tactic, it involves something called a discovered attack. When you see pieces on the same line or even diagonals too, look for pieces that are in the same diagonal. I can see the bishop, pawn, and queen. They're all on the same diagonal. And sometimes you can use discovered attacks, just like in this one. So what you can play is you can move your pawn to d5. And this makes a discovered attack because when the pawn moves, now the bishop is attacking the queen. And it not only attacks the queen, but when the pawn advances, it also attacks the bishop and the pawn too, but will probably capture the bishop. So I said we would capture the bishop because why? The bishop is worth 3 points, pawn is worth 1 point. So sometimes when deciding what to capture, you want to think about points, but not always. Sometimes it'll depend on the position, but other times you can depend on the points. So you capture the bishop, and this one will get you more material, so you capture the bishop. This is our next position, white to play and find the best plan. So this tactic involves something that's called removing the defender. What I can see is that both queens, they're having a staring contest, but I can also see that the rook is defending the queen. So that means if we try to distract the rook on e8 to go to another square, then we can win the queen, but try to find a way to do that. If we move our rook to d8, what happens is we give a check and we're trying to get the rook to move away from e8 so later we can capture the queen. But they have to capture our rook. They can't go down because all the pawns are blocking. So they have to capture. And now we capture the queen. And by using this tactic of removing the defender, we get to win their queen. This is our next position, black to play and find the best move. Okay, so we can try this move, knight f3. And this one, it involves 2 different tactics. The first tactic is that it makes a fork. It's attacking the king and the queen too. But try to figure out why can't the pawn capture? Why can't the pawn capture the knight? That's because it's using another tactic called a pin. If the pawn captures it, if it tries to capture, it just can't. Because then the queen would give a check to the king and you can't put your own king in check. So it involved 2 tactics, a fork attacking the king and queen, and using a pin since the pawn can't capture. And now when the king moves, now we use the hanging piece tactic and we capture their queen. This is our next position. Be sure to calculate. So our first move is rook takes h2. And the point of this is we want to find a way to get the king and queen on the same file. We want to try and win the queen. Why? Because the rook is defending the queen, so we want to try and get the king to block the rook. And that way we can win the queen later. So that's why you'll see later too if you didn't understand. Rook takes h2, and the king has to capture, no other option. And now to continue, this is why you had to calculate ahead. You can't just stop on the first move. Now you play rook h8, because this move, it forces them on the same file, and that's what I said was their plan. That's what was black's plan. Rook h8, and now the king, their only options are to go to the g file, to g2 or g3. But either option that they go, Now we capture their queen. And that was the point of doing the sacrifice and rook h8. But if you didn't calculate, you wouldn't be able to find that. And I said we wanted to get the king to block the rook. And since they had to go g2 or g3, both moves, the king blocks the rook. That's why we're able to capture the queen. This is our next position, white to play and find the winning plan. So here, white has checkmate in 2. First, if they capture the pawn on e7, and this move is important, because now, after they capture the pawn, the king will have to go to h8, since g7 is controlled by the queen, so they have to go to h8. And it's important that we remove that pawn, because now we can go to f6. That's why it was important that we did it, since also the knight was blocking, so this move, it gets the knight out of the way, and now we're able to go to f6, so that's checkmate. This is the next position. Be sure to calculate the opponent's options, and it's black to play. So with bishop a6, you can see that the bishop is protected by the queen. So this tactic involves removing the defender. The defender is the queen, so we're trying to distract it. If we play knight takes e5, we're trying to distract the queen because now the knight is attacking the queen. And if it goes to a square like a4, that's the point of this move. We're trying to get them away from defending the bishop. And when they go away, now we can capture the bishop since it doesn't have any defender anymore. But I also said look at their other options too. They don't have to go to a4. And any other move, they'll lose the queen. So a move that wouldn't lose the queen, but you might think it wouldn't lose the queen if you go to d6, but it will still lose the queen. Now you can try something called a discovered attack, and also it uses a fork too. If you go to d3, now this is a discovered attack, since when the knight moves, now the bishop is attacking the queen, and also the king is in check. So it's tactics combined. So when they go out of check, now you capture the queen. And that's why you have to calculate their options. You might think they won't lose their queen, but see if there's tactics. Don't just stop at one point. This is our next position, white to play and find the winning plan. So here, white has a mate in 2. The first move is rook takes a7. And I told you about removing the defenders because the bishop, it's stopping us from going to g7. We would like to bring our queen to g7 and checkmate, but the problem is that the bishop is there. We're trying to distract the bishop, so that's why we play the sacrifice. Since now the bishop has to capture, they can't go to g8, or they can't capture the rook since it's protected by the knight. So they have to capture the bishop, and that was the point of distracting them. Now when the bishop goes out of the diagonal, now we move our queen to g7, and it would be checkmate. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video to others. And I'll see you on my next video. Bye!